Free Churro is one of the most beloved and impressive episodes of BoJack Horseman, as BoJack unpacks his own tumultuous relationship with his mother Beatrice through her eulogy at her funeral. The midway point of Season 5 delivers the mother of all monologues that impressively navigates both the anger and pain BoJack feels while working through the loss of his mother in real time. It's a nuanced and intimate portrayal of a man coping with deep and unexpected grief.
Sooner or later, you need to learn that no one else is going to take care of you.
Free Churro begins with a flashback to BoJack's childhood as he waits for a parent to pick him up from soccer practice, clearly running late. Butterscotch arrives and immediately starts monologuing about Beatrice and his day. The first thing he does is complain about Beatrice herself, but what he says is important.
Your mother's having another one of her episodes. Last night she went to see A Doll's House with a couple of girlfriends, and now she has ideas.
A Doll's House is an 1879 stage play by Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen, a name you might recognize. BoJack actually name drops Ibsen in the beginning of the very first episode of the entire series, when talking about horsing around with Charlie Rose.
I think the show's actually pretty solid for what it is. That's not Ibsen, sure.
And we actually learned in the premiere of Season 2 that BoJack was parroting his mother Beatrice's own thoughts on horsing around. In that episode, we see a flashback to Beatrice in the live studio audience. The pair go out after lunch where she says,
"Well, it wasn't Ibsen."
And now we have this revelation that Ibsen's A Doll House was actually a major awakening for Beatrice, which, given the subject matter of the play, makes sense. A Doll's House is a story about a housewife who becomes disillusioned by the lack of opportunity in her life. Over the course of the play, she comes to the revelation that she is completely dependent on her husband. She quite literally feels like a doll, a toy with no agency whose actions have been determined by others in her life, first her father and then her husband. She realizes that she owes it to herself to learn to be her own person and not merely another's plaything. By the end of the play, she attempts to take control of her own life and she leaves her husband. And I think it's incredibly clear why this story resonated with Beatrice so strongly. Season 4 contains 2 episodes that really showcase the nature of Beatrice's upbringing and reveal the events that led to her life with Butterscotch, the Old Sugarman Place, and Time's Arrow. In the Old Sugarman Place, we see firsthand the expectations foisted upon both a young Beatrice and her mother Honey, particularly by Beatrice's father, Joseph Sugarman. Even as a child, Beatrice was denied many of the simple pleasures that boys her age were afforded.
Oh, Beatrice, you know iced cream is for boys. You can sprinkle some sugar on a lemon. That's a good healthy girl snack.
Beatrice was forced to see firsthand what happens when a woman strays outside of her societal expectations in those days. After Honey fell into a pit of depression and despair due to Cracker Jack's death, Joseph opts to have her lobotomized. She wasn't given the space or ability to deal with or unpack the heavy grief of her son's death. She was expected to go back to being a housewife, and when she couldn't cope, they turned her into a husk of a person. Beatrice essentially lost her mother because she wasn't fitting neatly into those unfair societal expectations, even through her grief. And obviously, this was going to affect how Beatrice navigated the world and her relationship to the men in her life. In Time's Arrow, we see that even though she didn't particularly want to, Beatrice catered to her father's wishes. Even after college, she agreed to go through with a debutante ball at her father's behest. She would take weight loss supplements that she dubbed pretty pills, a sad expectation that she would later force upon Hollyhock. And after she gets pregnant, she feels that she has no choice but to get together with Butterscotch to raise their child, despite clearly being a better match with Corbin Creamerman. And as we see in flashbacks and through Butterscotch's dialogue, she is expected to play housewife and cater to all of Butterscotch's needs, as though her own desires don't matter. And so, when Beatrice sees A Doll's House, a play about the complete lack of agency in a woman's life, she relates to it immensely and has an existential crisis. And ironically, this crisis leads Butterscotch to entirely reaffirm the fears she's coping with. As she's going through this crisis, he complains that she hasn't made him a sandwich for lunch and accuses her of only crying for attention.
I was able to cobble together a sandwich for myself, so I'm the real hero of the story.
To Butterscotch, making his own sandwich makes him a hero, but it's simply an expectation that he has of his wife. There's no gratitude for Beatrice's role in his life. He goes on to tell BoJack that he can't depend on women, and even goes so far as to call Beatrice a good mother for teaching BoJack this. It's incredibly sad that the one thing that Butterscotch praises Beatrice for is the neglect of her son.
Nothing to contribute? Knock once if you're proud of me.
After the cold open, we learn the episode's true nature. It's all a eulogy for Beatrice given by BoJack at her funeral. And after a brief anecdote about getting a free churro from the Jack in the Box, he actually starts to talk about his mother. But initially, he just brings up incredibly surface-level things about her.
Beatrice Horseman, Who was she? What was her deal? Well, she was a horse. She was born in 1938. She died in 2018.
BoJack's relationship with Beatrice is obviously not surface level, but I think part of BoJack wants it to be, because the deeper details of that relationship aren't fun to root around in, especially publicly. And he continues by just describing things he's seen her do derisively.
And one time she smoked an entire cigarette in one long inhale. Truly a remarkable woman.
We actually saw Beatrice inhale that entire cigarette back in Time's Arrow, and interestingly, in Season 6's A Horse Walks into a Rehab, we would see BoJack do the same thing, perhaps an indication that the disdain he feels for his mother also extends to himself. And BoJack also knows that Beatrice felt that disdain for him as well.
Knock once if you're proud of me.
This is where BoJack starts to move a little deeper to unpack his relationship with his mother, actually beginning to talk about the specifics of their relationship and dynamic.
Can I just say how amazing it is to be in a room with my mother and I can just talk and talk without her telling me to shut up and make her a drink?
Opening up about the miserable way she treated him, and of course, acknowledging one of his deepest pains and insecurities about their relationship. The fact that she held absolutely no pride for BoJack or any of his accomplishments. One persistent thing we know about Beatrice's relationship to BoJack is that she never showed support, even though he desperately craved her approval. At an incredibly young age, she hammered into his head that he needed to be a big success, and this was how he sought her love.
You better grow up to be something great, to make up for all the damage you've done.
I will.
And there are countless instances in flashbacks of Beatrice tearing BoJack down in just about every way possible. Yelling at him under the table, forcing him to perform the lollipop song, something he would talk about in this very eulogy. She chastises him as a child when he coughs from trying to smoke one of her cigarettes, complaining that he can't even do that right. When he tells her he's going to try and play football, she immediately tells him he won't be any good at it. Even when he has his massive and major success horsing around, she comes to the taping and does not laugh at a single joke. You can see BoJack's face break a little as he looks at his emotionless mother in the audience. Interestingly, the one time we do actually see Beatrice show any kind of support for BoJack's success is when she's at the Walnut Springs assisted living facility and her mind is ailing entirely. She can't recognize BoJack in person, but she actually shows slight adoration for her son's performance on Horsing Around, laughing at the show, though even this minor support comes with her criticisms.
Well, he's not much of a son, but the show can be a comfort sometimes.
And of course, the last time we see Beatrice actually lucid, before her mind began to fail, she tells BoJack one of the cruelest things a mother could ever say to her child.
You're BoJack Horseman. There's no cure for that.
But BoJack follows this up by telling a story about the one time Beatrice did show her support for him, about how he wanted a specific jacket to wear for this comedy routine at the high school talent show. And when he saved up enough money, the jacket had already been sold. And though she chastised him for wanting the jacket in the first place, on the day of the talent show, she had it there waiting for him.
And even though she didn't know how to say it, I knew this meant that she loved me. Now that's a good story about my mother. It's not true, but it's a good story, right?
The one story of actual care and support that BoJack musters up for Beatrice's funeral isn't real at all. It's something he stole from an episode of Maude. And of course, most of BoJack's understanding of love and relationships came from watching TV.
All I know about being good, I learned from TV.
As BoJack unpacks his own complicated relationship with Beatrice, he then begins to unpack some pretty fundamental aspects of himself. We see throughout the show that BoJack's lack of a supportive family and home life led him to rely on television for not just emotional support, but as a guiding light in how to live his life.
In TV, flawed characters are constantly showing people they care with these surprising grand gestures, and I think that part of me still believes that's what love is.
And though it's sort of surprising to hear BoJack acknowledge this, it's something we absolutely know to be true based on his actions throughout the series. In season 1, he steals the D from the Hollywood sign as a grand gesture for his love for Diane. After he nearly ruins his friendship and working relationship with her, he publicly apologizes to Diane at a ghostwriter's panel. In season 2, when things get off to a rocky start with his new girlfriend Wanda, BoJack impulsively asks her to move in with him. At the end of season 2, BoJack takes his boat out to the Giggle Ship to rescue Todd from the improv cult, to try and make up for bailing on his improv graduation show. In season 3, after losing Sarah Lynn, he tries to make amends with his other co-star Bradley by agreeing to do his Horsing Around spin-off idea Ethan Around before bailing again. In season 4, he goes to San Francisco to discover the identity of Hollyhock's mother and then flies to Wichita to get that information to Hollyhock personally. Through the first 5 seasons, the majority of the things that BoJack does for other people are in the form of these grand gestures, because, as he said, this is how he learned to show love. And additionally, this is what he wanted from Beatrice, to make up for the years of neglect. One big grand gesture that, in his mind, would undo all of the abuse he endured at her hand.
I kept waiting for that, the proof that even though my mother was a hard woman, deep down, she loved me and cared about me and wanted me to know that I made her life a little bit brighter.
Of course, he would never get it, because even in this very speech, BoJack acknowledges that this isn't real love. He knows that real love and support requires work.
But in real life, the big gesture isn't enough. You need to be consistent. You need to be dependably good.
And the BoJack we see in season 6, when he was at his healthiest, after rehab, when he was the best version of BoJack we ever saw, that was the consistent, dependable BoJack that he alludes to here in this eulogy. He doesn't try to fix everything with some grand gesture, he just supports his friends in consistent ways as they come. He happens to find an opportunity to plug Todd's Ace dating app, helping him meet Maud. He shows Diane the kind of support she needs while she's at her lowest, and cleans her apartment without her even knowing. He stumbles into an opportunity to give Mr. Peanut Butter that crossover episode he always dreamed of. At Wesleyan, he consistently shows up at Hollyhock's rugby matches and shows his support for her. Though BoJack's lack of a real support system and over-reliance on TV conditioned him to develop unhealthy relationship styles, he was still able to break those cycles that he had developed. Though, not entirely, as we know after his relapse that the events of The View from Halfway Down happened because at his lowest, he wanted Diane to give him that same type of grand gesture, to stop him from swimming in that pool.
Hello there. You are a person, and I see you.
Throughout the series, we see that BoJack truly had no real positive connection with his mother. He sought her approval through all of his success, and he never got it. The closest we ever saw to them connecting in a positive way was when he left her at the nursing home, and despite his justifiable anger, he helped ease her ailing mind.
You're in Michigan.
Michigan?
Yeah, at the lake house.
But even this was with a version of his mother who wasn't all there, and it had far more to say about BoJack's grace towards his mother than her extension of grace towards BoJack. But here in the eulogy, BoJack describes a moment at the very end of her life, as she was on her way out.
But there was this moment, this one instant of strange calm, where she looked in my direction and said, I see you.
BoJack goes on to describe how this wasn't any sort of praise, it wasn't anything derisive, it was completely neutral, simple recognition of BoJack.
Hello there. You are a person, and I see you.
I think the fact that the most basic of acknowledgement went that far for BoJack was that deeply affecting shows just how broken Beatrice's relationship to him actually was. Those 3 simple words gave BoJack what he wanted all along.
And it doesn't feel like a relief to finally be seen. It feels mean. Like, oh, turns out that you knew what I wanted and you waited until the very last moment to give it to me.
And even then, BoJack struggles to accept that moment of connection. He can't help but spiral about the possibility that Beatrice meant it more maliciously, or even that it didn't mean anything at all. Because truly, sometimes we do give things too much credit. Sometimes we apply the meaning that we need to something that is actually really very simple. BoJack relates this idea to a fan of Horsing Around who asked him about an episode of the series where he saw a continuity error, a paper cup on the set in one shot but not in another shot, and he applied his own interpretation of that idea and overanalyzed a simple mistake. A crew member left a coffee cup on set and it created a continuity error.
Maybe this is like that coffee cup. Maybe we're dumb to try to pin significance onto every little thing.
Sometimes I even wonder if that's what I'm doing here with these videos in this series. I know there is so much to dig into with this show and with these characters, but I also know that there are pieces of analysis I've put in these videos that I don't stand by, things I feel were a stretch. And I'm even sure that there are pieces of analysis that I do stand by and feel are deeply important that actually were not intended to be seen that way by the writers. There just has to be. Because maybe when applying this sort of meaning to something like this show, assigning importance to character journeys and how you do or don't relate to those characters, maybe that's more about us than it is about the show. Maybe the importance is your interpretation, how it connects to you personally, whether that was the intention or not. And that is exactly what BoJack did here, because soon he realizes what Beatrice really meant when she said, "I see you."
Jesus Christ. We were in the intensive care unit. She was just reading a sign.
Eventually, BoJack starts to talk about horsing around again.
It was written by my friend Herb Kazaz, who's also dead now, and it starred this little girl named Sarah Lynn.
Though he has a lot of regrets in his life, it's clear that Sarah Lynn is the one that still lingers, as he can't even bring himself to audibly say that she, too, has died. BoJack once again delves into the ways TV and life relate and differ. He talks about an episode of the show where Olivia's birth mom comes to visit. When she eventually is going to leave for California, Olivia wants to go with her. Despite the way that the network hyped up the "Will Olivia leave" cliffhanger, it was obvious that they were never going to just do the show without Olivia.
You can't have happy endings in sitcoms, not really, because if everyone's happy, the show would be over.
This is sort of a fundamental aspect of BoJack Horseman that they explore throughout the series. Because those sitcoms have these neatly wrapped endings where everyone is happy and the problem is solved, there's always another episode afterwards, where things reset. People don't just stay happy after a happy ending, as Diane said.
But every happy ending has the day after the happy ending, right?
There was no happy ending for Beatrice. There was no happy ending for Herb. There's no happy ending for Sarah Lynn. And ironically, we know that there wasn't even a happy ending to Horsing Around. In the series finale, they said that they killed off the horse and that the kids became orphans again. And in a way, these ideas even parallel the ending of BoJack Horseman itself. The series finale, Nice While It Lasted, is a nice finale. It lives up to its name. I think it's beautiful, but it is hardly a happy ending.
Life's a bitch and then you die, right?
Sometimes. Sometimes life's a bitch and then you keep living.
It feels like the show was intentionally written to leave you wondering what will come next. It gives you the feeling that these characters will go on, and it makes you want to know what that means for them, because
There's always more show, I guess, until there isn't.
My mother is dead, and everything is worse now.
in the middle of the eulogy, BoJack talks a bit about his mother, his father, and the ways in which they all related to each other. He brings up the parties that Beatrice used to throw and how she would close each party with a beautiful and sad dance routine, and that even though Butterscotch hated those parties, he'd always come out to watch Beatrice dance.
I was always aware that this moment of grace, it meant something.
But despite these moments where they, quote, remember they can swim, ultimately, they were all still drowning.
All three of us were drowning, and we didn't know how to save each other. But there was an understanding that we were all drowning together.
To me, it almost feels as though the Horsemans were all drowning under the weight of their own expectations. All three of them were aspiring creatives. Though Beatrice was saddled with domestic life, she was clearly the happiest when she was performing, when she was dancing. Butterscotch spent his entire life working on his great American novel, and when he finally finished it, the criticism literally killed him. The most successful artist in the family was BoJack himself, who actually made a career out of his comedy and performing, and it, too, would ultimately lead to so many of the poor decisions and stunted growth that were the root of his downfall. Beatrice instilled that need to perform into BoJack, and even though this entire show is filled with countless examples of BoJack's don't stop dancing attitude, I think this episode right here might actually be the best example of that.
You've got an audience out there, and they want to hear you sing.
Throughout his entire eulogy, BoJack is performing. It's sprinkled with jokes, dramatic moments where he's holding the audience in the palm of his hand, and honest emotion drawn from his real experiences. He had an audience, and as long as he had that audience, he was not going to stop dancing. It's sort of poetic that the strongest indication of his mother's effect on him was through his eulogy at her funeral. And even more poetic that through that eulogy, he truly realized why everything is worse now that his mother is dead. That he was still, even after all these years, holding on to the possibility that he could have some semblance of a meaningful relationship with his mother.
Because now I know I will never have a mother who looks at me from across the room and says, BoJack Horseman, I see you.
And ironically, this leads BoJack to the exact conclusion that his father attempted to instill in him as he drove him home from soccer practice. He once again reframes his mother's neglect as a good thing, that it was a lesson he needed to learn and not just abuse being inflicted on him.
Now, it's good to know that I am the only one that I can depend on.
And as he wraps up his eulogy, he goes to look at his mother in her casket, and in this moment, he realizes his mistake. He is not even at his mother's funeral. He's in the wrong room, giving the wrong people a eulogy. I think many see this as a cheap gag to end the episode, but I think it actually means a lot more than that. This eulogy was never actually about Beatrice Horseman. It was about BoJack Horseman. It was always about BoJack working through his grief and his complicated relationship with his mother. It didn't matter that BoJack spoke at the wrong funeral, because the attendees never needed to hear what BoJack had to say. BoJack just had to say it. BoJack was able to find some semblance of closure, so that at the end of the day, he was actually wrong when he said,
My mom died and all I got was this free churro.
All right, folks, I hope this lived up to the hype. I know you've been requesting it forever. Do me a favor, I just put out a 2-hour BoJack Horseman timeline, the final timeline in that series of videos. It was a ton of work, and I'd love if you checked it out. Please let me know in the comments what BoJack episodes you still want me to cover, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
Cellos.